News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman. Iran says it will not accept a ceasefire after the U.S. presented the Islamic Republic with a 15-point list of expectations to end the war. The semi-official Fars news agency reports that Iran does not accept a ceasefire and it is not logical to enter such a process with parties that violate agreements. The report continues on to say that Iran is focused on achieving its strategic objectives in confronting the opposing side, and only if those are met would an end to the war, not a ceasefire, be possible. Republican Senator Dave McCormick says the U.S. already, though, has the upper hand.
A lot of what's happening, I think, in the public domain shouldn't give us too much insight into what's happening behind the scenes. I think stepping back, bottom line, if you would have said on the first day of combat operations, where will we be 20, 21 days, 22 days into this, I think from a military perspective, we've made enormous progress. We still have work to do, but we've eliminated ballistic missiles, drones, manufacturing capability, the Navy. And those are the goals that President Trump set out, along with making sure Iran can never get a nuclear weapon.
Republican Dave McCormick sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance. Meanwhile, Iran's state-run Press TV says that the country won't allow President Trump to dictate when the war ends. With Iran still in control of the Strait of Hormuz, vessels seeking to transit the waterway under Iranian protection are being asked to provide lists of crew and cargo, along with voyage details and bills of lading. Iran has also been requesting payments from some ships generally reserved for oil tankers, gas carriers, or other vessels with high-value cargoes. That's according to people familiar with the trade. The price of Brent crude is currently at just under $101.50 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate is trading at under $90.50 a barrel. Energy analyst Stephen Shork with the Shork Group says there is currently a disconnect between prices in oil futures contracts and the barrels themselves.
Oil where we need it, the oil that is pent up in the Strait of Hormuz, is trading at upwards of $130, $140, $150 today. So that distance, that schism between the Brent market, the WTI market, those large discounts just tells you that where the shortage is. And the shortage of oil is not in the Atlantic Basin.
Shork Group President Stephen Shork tells Bloomberg Daybreak he expects oil prices to settle to where they were before the conflict started, around the $50 to $60 range if the war is resolved. The Pentagon has agreed with major defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems on a series of framework agreements meant to accelerate production of key missile systems that have seen heavy use during the initial phases of the war against Iran. Other contractors such as Honeywell Aerospace have also agreed to ramp up production of key weapons systems and components. The U.S. Supreme Court has thrown out a copyright infringement verdict against Cox Communications, undercutting music industry efforts to hold internet providers responsible for piracy by their customers. In a unanimous vote, the justices said Cox couldn't be held liable for failing to shut down the accounts of people who repeatedly downloaded and distributed songs without permission. A federal appeals court had upheld the finding. Shares of Sony, Warner Music, and Universal Music all fell on the news. SpaceX is considering a fundraising target in its IPO of about $75 billion, according to people familiar with the matter. The Elon Musk-owned company could seek a valuation in the IPO of more than $1.75 trillion and is weighing a market debut in June, though the timing could still shift. The company is weighing a ballpark figure of around $75 billion in its initial public offering. Democrats have won yet another special election, this one in Florida for a state legislature district that includes President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. The district was previously won by a Republican by 19 points, while Trump won the district by 17 points in 2024. Wall Street is cutting its forecasts for the U.S. economy this year, raising its projections for inflation and unemployment, and increasing the odds of a recession as the impact of the Iran war starts to come into view. Goldman Sachs says the risk of a downturn over the next 12 months has risen to 30%, with the jobless rate climbing by the end of the year. Several other firms say inflation will be closer to 3% this year than 2%, which will eat into disposable incomes while hindering companies from hiring. We check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow is up around 0.5%. The S&P 500 is also up around 0.5%, while the Nasdaq has gained around 0.75%. The 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.322%. The 2-year yield is at 3.877%. Gold extended gains after snapping a 9-day losing streak as traders weighed the likelihood of U.S.-Iran ceasefire talks. Bullion advanced as much as 2.5% 2.8% to over $4,550 an ounce, adding to a 1.6% jump in the previous session. Meta Platforms is cutting several hundred jobs as part of a restructuring effort impacting teams including sales, recruiting, and Reality Labs. The layoffs will affect employees both in the U.S. and other international markets. The cuts will impact fewer than 1,000 total employees. Overall, Meta had about 79,000 employees worldwide at the start of the year. Shares in Meta are currently up about 0.7%. And finally, NBA owners voted to explore adding franchises in both Las Vegas and Seattle, according to people familiar with the situation. Industry executives and insiders anticipate the bidding for each expansion team will start at $6 billion. Since the NBA last expanded back in 2004, with Robert Johnson paying $300 million to buy the Charlotte Hornets, team valuations have increased over $10 billion. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.